The morning was cloaked in a thick fog, swallowing the streets of the city as Dylan and Tyler made their way to the house that could soon be theirs. The brothers shared an unspoken excitement, a buzz of adrenaline at the thought of finally stepping out on their own. "There it is," Tyler pointed out, his voice tinged with a mix of optimism and caution. The house stood out. Its facade was worn but welcoming, with windows that gleamed with the promise of a new start. "Looks better than I expected," Dylan admitted, his eyes tracing the contours of the building. "Let's check it out." They were greeted by the realtor, Mrs. Hill, whose smile was a little too tight, her eyes a little too quick to flicker away. "You'll love it here," she assured them, leading them through the creaking front door. The inside was a surprise, spacious and filled with light, betraying the house's humble exterior. "Wow," Tyler breathed. "This is more than we hoped for." Dylan nodded, his eyes already looking around the space, imagining their lives unfolding within these walls. They wandered from room to room, their steps echoing slightly on the hardwood floors. It was when they reached what would be Tyler's future room that the first seed of doubt took root. "What's with the lock?" Tyler asked, fingering the latch on the outside of the door. "Oh, that?" Mrs. Hill hesitated, her rehearsed confidence faltering. "Just a quirk of the previous owners. Old houses, you know." But Tyler's curiosity was piqued. "Who lived here before us?" he pressed. Mrs. Hill sighed, her shoulders slumping as if she carried a heavy burden. "A family," she began slowly. "A woman, her husband, their child, and the husband's mother. She was old, her mind beginning to fray at the edges. The husband refused to put her in a home, so they used that lock to keep her safe from herself." Dylan and Tyler exchanged a look. "The grandmother," Mrs. Hill continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She started calling her son by the wrong name, called him William, though his name was Michael. William was his brother who died at birth. The silence that followed was heavy. She got worse, always locked in here, alone, started seeing things that weren't there, talking to people who had long passed. And," Tyler urged, his heart pounding not just with fear but with a morbid fascination, "one day, they found her dead," Mrs. Hill whispered, "in the closet, hiding from demons only she could see." The room felt smaller suddenly, the shadows cast by the fading light taking on menacing shapes. They moved out soon after, couldn't bear the memories, or the guilt, I suppose. The brothers stood in silence, the story settling around them like dust. Yet it was Dylan who broke the silence, his voice stronger than he felt. "We'll take it," he said, a determined glint in his eye. "Every house has its ghost, right? We'll make new memories here." Tyler nodded, his resolve hardening. "Let's do it. Our new beginning." The first few days in the new house were a whirlwind of unpacking, rearranging furniture, and the brothers adjusting to their newfound independence. The odd lock on Tyler's door had become nothing more than a quirky feature of their new home, a topic of conversation that elicited a shiver or a laugh depending on the mood. One evening, as they sat amidst boxes and half-assembled shelves, the conversation turned to the house's previous occupants. "Do you ever think about her?" Tyler asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. "The old lady who lived here before us?" Dylan paused, a screwdriver in hand. "Sometimes. It's hard not to, especially with that lock staring us in the face every day." They shared a look, the weight of the house's history pressing down on them for a moment before Tyler shook it off. "Let's find out more," he suggested impulsively, "about the family that lived here." Dylan raised an eyebrow but nodded. The curiosity that had taken root in both their hearts was too strong to ignore. The next day, they visited the local library, diving into old newspapers and public records. What they found was a story that was both heartbreaking and frightening. The family that had lived in the house was the Harrisons, Michael Harrison, the father, was a quiet man known in the neighborhood for his devotion to his family. His wife, Laura, was often seen tending to the garden, a splash of color against the drab backdrop of the neighborhood. Their child, a bright-eyed boy named Alex, was the light of their lives. But it was the story of Agnes, Michael's mother, that captured Dylan and Tyler's attention. Agnes had been a vibrant woman in her youth, known for her sharp wit and kind heart. But as she aged, dementia began to steal away her memories, her sense of self, until she became a shadow of the woman she once was. The brothers learned that Michael had indeed had a brother named William, who died shortly after birth. Agnes's dementia twisted this tragic memory, and she began to call Michael by William's name, a mistake that pained him deeply. As Agnes's condition worsened, she became a danger to herself and unintentionally to others. Michael refused to place her in a nursing home, a decision that placed a heavy burden on the family. The lock on the outside of the room was a last resort, an attempt to keep Agnes safe from the dangers her mind conjured. The articles detailed how the family's life unraveled, the strain of caring for Agnes, and the toll it took on all of them. And then the tragic end: Agnes found dead in the closet, her body curled up as if she were hiding from the world that had become too confusing, too frightening to navigate. After her death, the Harrison family disappeared from public records. It was as if they had vanished. As Dylan and Tyler left the library, the sun had begun to set. They walked home in silence, each lost in thought. That night, as they sat in their new home, the brothers couldn't shake the feeling that the house held more than just the remnants of its past occupants. The initial charm of the house, with its spacious rooms and the mystery of its past, began to wane as the weeks turned into months. The first incident was subtle, almost dismissible. Light bulbs throughout the house, brand new and carefully screwed in, began to burn out at an alarming rate. At first, the brothers joked about their home having an appetite for light, a quirk that added to its character. But as one bulb after another succumbed to the darkness, their laughter began to fade. "It's not just the bulbs," Tyler said one evening, frustration lining his voice as he replaced yet another in the kitchen. "It's like the house is eating them." Dylan, ever the skeptic, shrugged it off. "Must be the wiring. I'll call an electrician tomorrow." The electrician's visit brought no relief. After a thorough inspection, he assured them that the wiring was in good condition, suggesting power surges might be the culprit. But his explanation fell flat when they learned that none of their neighbors experienced similar issues. The house stood alone in its hunger for light. It was around this time that Tyler's girlfriend, Emma, decided to spend the night. She had heard the brothers' stories, the playful banter about their haunted house, and had laughed along with them. But that night, her laughter turned to unease. "I saw shadows," she confided to Tyler the next morning, her eyes shadowed by the weight of sleepless hours. "All night it felt like someone was watching me." Tyler, concerned but cautious not to alarm her further, tried to rationalize. "It was probably just the street lights or a trick of the mind. You know how it is when you're in a new place." But Emma shook her head, adamant. "No, it wasn't that. It felt heavy, like a stare. And that mirrored closet in your room, I swear something was looking at me from inside it." Her words made Tyler uncomfortable, a feeling that was becoming all too familiar. The playful ghost stories they had told each other no longer seemed so amusing. One night, Dylan wasn't home. Tyler tossed and turned, his sleep shallow and filled with unease. The house around him was silent, too silent, as if it were holding its breath. Then, cutting through the silence like a knife, a creak sounded so close it might as well have been right next to him. His eyes snapped open to the darkness of his room, heart racing. The mirrored closet door was open. Frozen in fear, Tyler could only stare. The floorboards groaned softly under an invisible weight, making his blood run cold. Someone's in the house, he thought, panic tightening its grip around his chest. With a shaky breath, Tyler forced himself to move. Reaching for the baseball bat by his bed, he crept out of the bedroom, each step cautious, the creaks leading him first toward the kitchen. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating an empty room. Nothing here, he muttered to himself, trying to still his racing heart. The sound led him next to the hallway, but it too was deserted, bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. Just as he turned back towards his room, a loud creak made him freeze. The closet door slammed shut, echoing ominously through the silence. Tyler dashed back into his bedroom, ready to confront whatever lurked there. But the room was empty, the closet door now firmly closed. He swung it open, bracing himself, only to find nothing but the empty space inside. Dropping the bat, he slumped against the wall, overwhelmed. "Something's not right," he whispered into the darkness, fear and confusion swirling within him. When morning light seeped into the room, Tyler's resolve hardened. He had to tell Dylan. "Dylan, I'm telling you, something weird is happening," Tyler insisted, the frustration evident in his voice. "Tyler, the house is just old, and with the stories about the previous tenants, but thinking it's haunted." "Come on, man," Dylan replied, distrust clear in his tone. Tyler felt a mix of anger and helplessness. "It's not just in my head. I heard it, felt it. It's like we're not alone here." Dylan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I get that it's creepy, but ghosts, really? We need to think more logically here." Tyler paced, the weight of the night pressing down on him. "But you weren't there, Dylan. You didn't hear what I heard. I'm not making this up." Dylan looked at him, concern finally breaking through the distrust. Okay, let's just keep an eye out, all right? If something's really going on, we'll figure it out together." Tyler nodded, but as the days passed, the strange occurrences didn't cease. A few days later, Tyler was walking home from work one evening, trying to shake off a creeping sense of unease. The neighborhood was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that made every little sound seem louder. He glanced up at his house as he approached and froze. The curtains of the upstairs window moved, as if someone was peeking out. But that's impossible, Tyler thought. Dylan said he'd be out tonight. His heart raced. Should he call the police? But then, as if on cue, the curtains opened wider and an old pale face with thin gray hair looked out at him. Tyler's stomach turned. There was no one who looked like that in their house. The face vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving Tyler staring at a window with tightly drawn curtains. He waited outside, too scared to enter. Hours passed, and there was no sign of Dylan. Tyler's phone calls went unanswered. The cold night air made him shiver, but fear rooted him to the spot. Eventually, desperation and the biting cold pushed him to act. He approached the front door, his key at the ready, only to find it strangely unlocked. As he stepped inside, he called out, only to hear Dylan's voice reply, "Is that you?" But something was off about the voice. It was muffled and didn't sound quite right. Dylan stood in the hallway, an image of calm as he stirred his tea, an act so mundane it bordered on surreal given the circumstances. Very funny, Tyler's voice was sharp, a fear bleeding through. "What's funny?" Dylan's reply was muffled, odd, further unsettling Tyler, who in his agitation brushed it off and pushed past him towards his room. The contact with Dylan's skin was jarring. It was unnervingly cold and slimy, like decay. Tyler slammed the door shut. He needed a moment to think, away from the eerie calm of the rest of the house. He opened his closet to put away his sweater and froze in horror. Dylan was there, sitting lifelessly among the hanging clothes, his body unnaturally still. Tyler backed away, unable to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. but the sound of a teaspoon clinking against ceramic and footsteps approaching his room snapped him back to a terrifying reality. Tyler realized, this is the end.